Morning, everybody. Today we are lecturing on Unit 2. I know it's only the second day of class, but my philosophy for the people here in the SharePoint program is that we get all this formal book stuff out of the way so that we have more class time towards the end to get our work done. But also because the concepts that are in here are pretty important for getting your work done. And I think, you know, in many ways might help you or at least give you a perspective on it. And you guys also have the good fortune, I think, if you want to call it that, of the fact that you've already kind of been working on projects before the class even started. So some of the pieces are already in place, but it does not undermine the importance of some of the things we're going to talk about here. Really, the main focus of this particular chapters collectively really focuses a lot around putting proposals in place and how you function as a team. So read this little quote here. This comes from the author of the book, and it's a series of quotes. You guys can read it. You don't want me to read it, do you? So basically, you need to have some sort of an agreement. You just really can't get around it. If you do something informally without an agreement, I'm just telling you from experience, many times over, you're asking for trouble. Even if it's for a free project, like you're just doing it for somebody for free, still recommend that you put a proposal in place, like you guys are doing with your clients. You don't expect to be paid, but it does set the parameters. You don't want somebody to say, well, you promised it would be up by this date, and it's not up, and now I'm going to sue you. Or you set some sort of a limitation. The logo looks terrible. Well, I didn't get hired to put the logo in. It really is just basically an approach for not having disagreements or misconceptions. Big companies always have legal look over their contracts. What I'm going to do as we move forward is I'm going to actually look for an example of a scope of work statement from a real vendor, pretty major vendor, that was writing a scope of work statement for Gateway for our SharePoint servers. And I'll show you what that's like, so you can see what a big firm's approach would be to doing something like this. Now, you guys might not do this probably ever. Has anybody ever signed a formal business contract, like taking on a project or taking a job contractually? Okay, Carl's nodding. Most people haven't. I mean, most people get a job and they work the job. But very often, even when you get a job, you know, you usually sign an employment contract. Or maybe you just forgot about that part of it, right? There's all sorts of stuff in there. Most people do not look at it. Oh, you got the job. Great. Sign. And some people do their business that way, too. I know that when I was in business, here's a wonderful example. You deal with vendors. Vendors often operate on a business level, giving their customers a line of credit. And it's not like a credit card, but it's like, okay, we'll give you 2 weeks to pay or 30 days to pay. We deliver the product if it's good, in 30 days give us the money, and everything's great. But that can be a risk for somebody giving you product, because how do you know you're going to pay? So very often when you first establish an agreement like that, they'll have you sign a thing saying, well, company ABC agrees to pay after 30 days all invoices, and after that we're going to charge you 2% interest a month, or some sort of term. And then some will try to trick you. And it's like, okay, sign here, initial there, sign here. It's like, what's this other one for? Oh, that's if the company doesn't pay, you got to pay. I had a couple people try to trick me like that. You know, so you got to read what you're signing. But also, if you're creating the contract, you have to read what you're creating. So It's important. But notice that well, in my situation, my company was a full-blown corporation. Full-blown corporations have a separation of identity. So even though I owned 100% of it, the corporation was its own legal entity. So if it incurred debt, right, or liability, and it couldn't pay, they can't come to me and take my money because that corporation was its own entity. Right. So what they wanted is like, well, if you can't pay, or if the company can't pay, you're going to pay. And of course, I didn't sign that part because I actually read it. I'm like, no. And then some will be like, well, then we can't give you the line of credit. I'm like, well, all right, I'll just go to your competitor. All right, we'll give you a line of credit. That's usually how it goes. But you have to spell that stuff out. Now, one thing that you guys aren't thinking about is the financial side of things, and we're going to talk about the financial side of things as we're working. And that's one of the things that he mentions here in the quote. If you guys are really taking on a project like this from a client, you might do some of the initial steps up until signing a proposal for free. You might even consult with them for free. You might even put in a significant amount of time and never get any business out of it. However, when you draft that proposal, you need to take all those things into consideration. Is the person going to pay you for all the work up front without seeing anything? Probably not.
Are there ways to protect yourself so that if you are showing them layouts or wireframes, that they can't use your layouts or whatever you're proposing to them and take it to someone else to do?
Oh, absolutely. You put copyrights on it. So like if you, let's say, created a hard copy or electronic copy and you put a lot of work into creating the wireframe, I would put a little watermark in there, or, you know, don't give them the source file, give them an image file, so that removing a watermark or thing that has a copyright in there is a little bit of work. It's not that it can't be done. It certainly can be done with the right tools and knowledge, but you have some sort of protection mechanism that way. But really, you got to specify it in an agreement. You know, so I wouldn't be creating extensive wireframes for anybody without some sort of down payment. And that really, you know, that's what the payment schedule is all about. Typically work like this, what I would recommend if you guys ever end up freelancing, 50% down. Half up front to get started, half at the tail end, right? After it's all approved, you don't hand over any passwords until you get that last payment. That's your only protection. So that, you know, there's considerations. You know, if it's a really long, involved project, and let's say it's a $10,000 project that stretches over 10 months, you might set it up so you get $1,000 a month. Or you might set up 3 lump sums or 4 lump sums or something. But certainly the person that's giving you money wants to be protected as well. They don't want to be paying you money and not get any product. And I've seen lots of projects like that. Oh, I paid $5,000 for this, and it's just like a horrible website. You paid them all up front? Oh, yeah. No. And then from a client standpoint, how do you pay? That's the other issue. Yeah, that's a different type of issue. But even with hardware, though, there's usually terms. I mean, it's pretty standard thing on like a business-to-business or wholesale level is 30 days. Most people will give you 30 days. Depends on the industry. My company's, a couple of them, dealt with food products. Food products typically are like cash in hand. At best, you get a week. You know, but your vendor comes in with a load of, you know, Coca-Cola. They want a check in hand, or they're not leaving the Coca-Cola. But then you get these big vendors like Walmart. Yeah, they'll say, okay, we're ordering $1 million worth of product. Instead of 30, give us 90. And then they play these other tricks where it's like, all right, well, one pallet was damaged. We're withholding payment until you replace it. And it's like this, the stretching of like when you pay money, the time value of money, the interest available on it. I mean, you don't think about that, but if like the time value of money is $5,000 on that million, I mean, that's $5,000, right? So those things add up, especially on a macro scale. All right, I know you're not going to read all that. Look at the red stuff. Right, you got to be really careful when you're communicating with people, and I think we were talking about that before, because you can say things that can be misinterpreted. You also get the situation, and we had this with cohort 2 with the church project, where you have somebody that comes in, a client, that thinks they're pretty tech savvy and think they know the lingo. And they have all these assumptions, and you got to work with the person, and you realize you think you know a lot, but really, in truth, you know nothing. And that's really kind of mean to say, but because they think they know a lot, there's all this, ambiguity that happens. So there's all these assumptions. Well, I thought you meant, when you said wireframe, I thought you meant, not something else. So you got to make sure that you guys are doing that. Contracts, you need your contracts, you need details in the contracts. All right, so I'm looking at the proposal format that was presented in the book and the templates that the author provides. And that's kind of the basis for the stuff that we do. The common components are things that you see on the page here. Now, depending on how involved it is, it can get quite formal. You guys don't have a title page, right? Because your contract's not like this thick. Contracts do get that thick. My taxes are about that thick over here. Especially, oh man, you should have seen my business taxes. That was quite a thing. All right, but then if you have proposals and you're making changes to the proposals, it's good to have a revision history. Now, these are just formal document things, and now that we work electronically, we don't think about them as much. But any tool that you use, like Word, Google Docs does it, a lot of other products do it as well, we'll keep revision histories of the things that you're working with, especially if you trigger it on. So people make changes. Okay, well, this is great, but I didn't like the line that you said that we have to pay for the logo. Okay, well, we're going to strike that part. And see, and that's really a good example, too. Like if you're doing a project, okay, we're building the website based on your design. I don't know, if we're making the design, that's 500 extra. Oh, we're making the logo, that's 500 extra. We're doing all the photography, etc. So you have to make those assumptions because all those three things I just mentioned are very time consuming and take a special skill set on top of it all. All right, so some of this stuff is in your proposals. You have an overview, right? This little abstract or whatever, a couple of sentences. We're building a site for you on WordPress. It's going to be good for you. The project approach, we'll see that in a couple of seconds here. The scope of work, probably the most important part of it. And usually when you begin a proposal process with an organization, it's the scope of work that gets hammered out first. So it's like, well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to load WordPress. We're going to put it on this host. We're going to install these plugins. We're going to put this template in. We're going to add the content. We're going to give you the passwords. That's the scope of work. That's what we're doing. If it's not in the scope of work, we're not doing it. Notice, scope of work didn't say we're making a logo. I would bet your proposal doesn't say that you're making the logo. I'm looking right at Shelly. Shelly's the only one here making eye contact with me consistently. With Greg, I can't tell because he's got glasses on, but I think he's doing it too. All right. Certain assumptions, deliverables, like what actually are you giving, what are you giving them? Really, what are you delivering? Are you just delivering the website already loaded up on a host? All right, let's start popping through some of these. Yeah, I mean, it's goofy stuff. The template, you can get it from the author's website. I think I have a blank one in the course shell somewhere. All right, we were just kind of doing this, so we don't need to do it again. The proposal that the author shares with you, he puts this little project approach in there, and I don't know if you guys have been introduced to this concept, the Purite process. Yeah. So this is an approach. And, you know, really what they do is like, you know, system development lifecycle. You guys have heard of this, right? It's just a way of defining stuff that you kind of naturally do and put a label on it. But also for people that have never really done it before, it also kind of spells out an architecture for proceeding, because, you know, how are we going to do this? What I think is kind of odd, though, is that he kind of essentially puts it into the proposal that we're using this approach. I don't necessarily recommend that you put that in there. I think that's kind of, I don't know how to put it. It's unnecessary is really the best way to put it. All right, you can look at the definitions yourself. That's on you. Scope of work. Right. I mean, that's how I say it. It's more of a behind the scenes thing as opposed to, you know, your client should see that. Now, unless your client has a very specific reason that you proceed in a particular way, they might. You know, you're signing a big contract, they're like, well, we don't want you using this approach. We want you using this approach. We want to see your daily builds. A lot of developers won't do that. So, all right, so scope of work, we were just talking about that. What exactly are you going to do is really the best way to say it. Okay, going back to kind of about where we left off that first slide. You know, assumptions. What are you assuming? I'm assuming you're going to provide me a logo. But not only provide me a logo, I mean, I don't want you to provide me the logo, but like, here, go to our website, right-click, save as. No. I want the Illustrator files that created it. Or I want the Photoshop files. Or I want the image in 20 different formats, black and white, this size, this file format. I want everything. Because that way, you don't have to do the work. I mean, if you're getting like a JPEG file from somebody, here's my logo, and it's like, well, now I need to convert it to a transparent PNG. So I got to sit there and do all that work, right? So you need to spell out assumptions that you're going to provide the logo, source files, and the images in all these different formats. You would spell it out. And I assume that if I like email you for something, that you're going to get back to me within a day. You would do that in the contract, because otherwise I can't guarantee to get it done on time. Now, you know, a lot of that type of stuff, the more detail you put in is usually relative to the professionalism and the scope of the project, meaning how large the project is, how much money is behind it, what companies are working on it, right? Because if you're working with like a consulting firm or a design firm, they got people on the payroll that are making some money, right? These people need to stay on task, and they need to get it done a certain way to earn their money so that you can pay the money so they can get paid. So, I mean, those aspects are critical. And a lot of times people working in larger firms are working on 10 projects at the same time. It's not unusual. Absolutely. You know what part of my employee contract says? When you guys send me an email, I need to respond within 48 hours. And we had a discussion about this at in-service, where it's like 48 business hours or 48, does that include weekends? Because I do tell my students that, like, you email me on a Friday night, you might not get a response till Monday morning. Because I have a life too, right? So, you know, assumptions, you spell it out. Spell out what you're expecting the person to do. You're also going to spell out what you're going to deliver. What is it exactly you are going to provide? Are you going to take the site and load it up on the host? Or are you just going to build it and provide the development files and they can deal with that on their own? That might be the case. Here's a zip file. Good luck. It's not really quite that bad. But what exactly you're going to provide. And then one thing that people don't think about. So for example, we have a person here that's working on a logo for one of the projects. Now, if you were creating that logo from scratch and you didn't have it in the agreement, you could very likely say, well, I did create it for you, but it's my work, so I retain ownership. You want to use that logo, you got to pay me for it. Or you build it into the contract that says, okay, you're paying me an extra $1,000, and we're going to create a logo for it, you own it. Now with the student work that you guys do, the ownership and rights really should be squarely upon the client. Their logo, all that stuff, you really don't want to get into legal hassles of who owns what. However, if you are writing some code for the website and it's really clever, like you come up with some really cool algorithm for something, I would say that you as a student should retain that. Like if you write custom code, that like if you're working in WordPress and you go ahead and you create your own plugin, right? You don't want the client to own it, right? So things, you need to think about those things. We do have different types of licensing too. You guys know what Creative Commons is? Have you ever heard of that? It's basically open source licensing is what it is. Now, very often when you post stuff on YouTube or you upload your photos to certain online repositories, very often they automatically apply Creative Commons to it. And basically what this means is people can use it, but you still have ownership over it. Right? You created it, you own it, it's attributed to you, but it's still out there for public use. There's lots of stuff out there that falls under this license. That's not always the case, though. You don't want people stealing your stuff, and it's not really good, basically, to steal somebody else's. So, I got listed here additional costs and fees. You might have to have a little clause in there that says, well, if we choose a paid template, you got to pay for it. Or we'll pay for it out of the money you're paying us. Right? And that might be an easier way to work because then you don't have to wait for somebody to approve it and do a PO and then pay the PO and then, it could put you back a week. Waiting for somebody else's processes to complete. So those are things you have to build in as well. Now, sometimes you'll do a project and you will just quote a very specific price that will have no alterations, right? Or you can quote and say, this is my estimate. These are the costs we've incurred. It's costing us a little bit more. It's taking an extra month, so we're going to have to bump up the budget a little bit. And you can leave room in the contract to make those alterations. Most of the stuff on a small scale is going to be fixed price, typically. But then you can also do something else. And that something else is something, like what I would typically do for a project is I would say, okay, I'm going to build your site and throw out a number, I'm going to charge $1,000, okay? And then after we've completed it, put it live, you've made your final payment, I'll support the site at no extra cost for 30 days. Sometimes I would do 60. After that, if you want me to do something, this is how much I charge. Comment?
You were saying based on a smaller project, what is that scale? What do you consider small?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and frankly, most website work is going to be, in the $1,000 to $10,000 range, typically for a project. When you start to get to big corporate sites, that's the game changes. And in that case, you're usually going to have a legal department negotiating it.
define so that, we can jump into the
Right, but you would define a scope of work. Like you might have a team of like coders and planners and designers and all that, specify the scope of work, maybe make a couple of notes on it, and then they hand it over to the legal or business department, and they hammer out the language, and then it gets reviewed by those people, and then it goes off to the client, and then their lawyers look at it and revise some stuff, and send, it's like this process, and even that can take a month, right? So when you get to these, like we think of like the big healthcare.gov website, right? Now, I have to say I'm really fortunate because right when they like mandated everybody use that, right, is right when I started at Gateway. And I just did a collective like, whew, because I, for years, was my own boss, and I paid for my own insurance out of pocket, and it is expensive. It's painful. It's a bitter pill to swallow. And then when it's like the government's going to step in and make me jump through all these additional hoops, I don't know if I'll pay less or more or whatever, but it's just all these additional hoops. Where before it's just like I was sending off my check to, the insurance company and you're done with it. But think of like all the complaining that was done about that website, how over budget it was. I think they spent like more than twice what they said they were going to spend, and it took almost twice as long. But then think about what really they were building. They're building a website that's data-driven, that hypothetically would hold information on everybody in the country. That's pretty hardcore, right? That's not a WordPress site. They got some different technologies going on there. And there's a lot of things that they probably thought about when they did the bids. But apparently they had something in the contract that said, well, this is the bid and we're going to try to do it for this. But if we encounter some difficulties and we have problems with this, and that, and we need to go over budget, you guys are agreeing that it's okay to go over budget. And usually what happens is like, well, the project's not done. We got a whole lot more to do. You got to pay us some more or else it's not getting done. Because taking a big project and handing it to somebody else, it's almost like starting over because those people then have to figure out what these other people are working on. You see the complexities that are involved there? And sometimes when your work is being bidded out, so if you flip roles and you're the client, cheapest bid isn't always the best bid. My wonderful example of that is the city of Milwaukee. You hear my griping about property taxes and stuff. Pay a boatload in property taxes. You guys probably freak. My mortgage payment is more property taxes than it is house payment. Yeah, believe me, I've considered that. I'm trying to get my wife to buy into that. But, all right, so what they do is like they have stuff that they need done. So, for example, they hire contractors to come along every year or two, and they put tar in the streets in between all the slabs of concrete, right? So, and they do that so that water doesn't get in and make the concrete expand and freeze and thaw and crack and all, because it's expensive to put concrete in. So last year they hired this contractor that was supposed to tar the road. And if you guys have ever seen people do that, the way you're supposed to do it is you're supposed to, sweep it off, take an air compressor, blow out the cracks so it's nice and clean, and so that the tar sticks. Well, these guys, when they did it at 2 o'clock in the morning. They did not use a compressor to clean anything out. And 90% of it, and this is like a year ago, has already either pulled up, was getting stuck to people's tires, the snow plows are pulling it. It was just a disaster. And the bid was probably a couple $1,000s cheaper than somebody else. And and even when I poured concrete in my basement 17, 18 years ago, I got 3 bids. And the bids I got were like $7,000, $2,000, and $4,500. So I went with the one in the middle. I did. But it was for a lot of reasons, but and it turned out great. I have a really nice basement floor now. So You have to think about those things and when you get paid and how you get paid and what you're going to get paid in the aftermath. And one thing that you guys should not discount when you're working on these school projects is that there's very high likelihood that those people will need maintenance on their sites or revisions or additions, or maybe the work wasn't complete, and they'll be more than happy to hire one or some of you to do the work. And that's been the case on almost every project I've seen come through, like our students. So, keep that open as a possibility. And depending on what the people do, for example, I think I probably showed you the wheel small engine repair site that some of my students did. The guy was so happy with the work he did. One guy brought his mower in to get fixed, and he didn't charge him. Right? You guys have brought me so much business, it's on the house. That type of thing. And don't discount that as a possibility too. We have done restaurants. Yeah, and actually that's been the case for me. I did one that I remember very succinctly is doing a pizza place out in Elkhorn, and never met the people face to face. Did the whole project, talked to them on the phone, emails, all that stuff. And then one day I just happened to be out there for a gateway thing, and I just popped in and introduced myself. I'm like, oh my God, sit down, have some food, So, I mean, that kind of thing happens, and that should not be discounted either. I think that kind of speaks for itself. The part that you guys might not think about is measurable, right? I have you do those task lists, or I want you to at least, like crop all the images. Let's say that's one of the tasks. Well, how do you measure that? You're going to have somebody check on it, right? Verify it. And hopefully the person is thorough. Not everybody is meticulous about their work. And some of this stuff is tedious. Like, I've done websites that have thousands of images where I shot all the images, multiple images for each item, to weed it down to those 1,000, edit every one of them, crop every one of them, color adjust it, put it on the website, go, no, that's not quite right, and do it again. Then you got to be really systematic, and you got to be able to have a way to keep track. Spreadsheets are a wonderful way to do that, to keep track of things. And that's why I kind of push people into that. Now, if you're looking at what you're trying to do, and actually this slide is more about kind of like the holistic approach to the website. If you're building a website for a business, okay, let's look at SMT, right? Why are they building a website? To get more business. That's a pretty clear goal, right? Well, that's pretty easy to understand. That's pretty distinct, and it's measurable, right? This year's sales were this amount. Next year's sales after the website were this amount. And a good website can have a significant impact on your bottom line. The cool thing about the web, and you guys need to keep this in mind, is you can be a nobody, create a website that is on par with like a big giant retailer, and kind of like 1, 2, 3 overnight end up competing with them head to head. That's not really possible in a lot of other mediums. It's not like you're going to go out, buy 100 acres of land, on like a busy business street, and put up shop next to Walmart and compete, because you got to have some money to do that. But a website, $100 a year, you can, and a whole lot of effort, you can have a website that competes. So it's very measurable. All right, possible objectives. Increase the amount of traffic, more money. Sometimes people will write this sort of thing into a contract. So for example, you create a website for us that's better than our previous website, and we see a 20% increase in sales in the first 3 months, we're going to give you a bonus. know, there's all sorts of little, I mean, sports players do it all the time. They have little incentive clauses in there.
No, for visitors? Actually, I haven't seen that in a lot of years, not like having an internal conversation, something where they can only see, you know, I don't ask them if they want something.
Does anybody know how to answer this topic? The old school way was to create a counter that you would call it PHP, JavaScript, whatever, and it would store information, right? So, and it was kind of a pride thing. This page has been visited 1,000 times. The truth is, who cares? And a lot of those were hit counters. So hit counters, you know how they operate? If you got 20 images on a page, that counts as 20 hits. Because it's 20 files. That's a hit counter. That's not a page view. All right. Then you can have one person visit a site, and they look at 20 pages. It's one visitor, though. Right? So 20 pages might be 100 hits on the website. That doesn't mean anything. Now that it's a unique user, that means something. So those 100 hits turn into 1. Then you take a look at information like, how long was that person on my site? 30 seconds? You'll be lucky if they're on there for 30 seconds. You get them to stay for 5 minutes, very likely they're considering buying something. You keep them on there for a half hour, I can almost guarantee they're going to buy something.
How does that work? The database and then the customer procedure to verify,
Well, it's funny that you ask. Let me just give you a demonstration. I run my own hosting, right? And I have like a silly front end, okay, that really does nothing. I've always meant to build it out. But the reason it exists is because I resell hosting and domain names, so this is me. You can feel free to patronize me. I'm not forcing you. I'm just saying. Probably should have removed that from the video, but okay, so I have this website, and this is actually runs off of somebody else's servers. This isn't even me doing it. I'm just a reseller. Okay. But my main website, my hosting, if I go into my control panel, and all hosts have this intrinsically built into their web server. There's logging that happens. And then that logging gets turned into statistics. I'm trying to remember how to look at it here. It's been a while. Not the log manager, traffic statistics. All right. So this is built in to most hosts that run Apache web servers. All right. So what this is showing is very specific data. Right, so it shows traffic. Now, I can tell you what, I hardly ever visit this page. And I would be surprised if anybody really visits it. But when I was running a business, I would look at this stuff, maybe not every day, but at least once or twice a week. I wanted to see what was going on, how much traffic we were getting, how many people were on the site, how long they were staying. So you can see, here's that difference again. The number of hits versus the number of unique visitors. Well, that really amazes me. But it's working on there. Because my web page isn't working too many things. Now, but can I tell you what? For SMT, their host is going to have some sort of logging service like this already present. I would bet that they're lucky if they get 5 hits a day, 5 visitors a day.
So there's existing statistics from them that they can look back on, so when you do that, they can
Absolutely.
compare and say, it went up 20% or something like that.
All right, so if you start breaking it down, all right, so apparently on the first I got 9 visitors, 296 pages. See, I'm really curious. I wonder if it is actually logging my reseller thing. It must be.
Does it count bots too?
It does count bots. Bots are visitors. All right, so we're looking at the traffic for the days of the week. Now, mind you, this is for November, and November doesn't have a full set of data yet. So let's look at October. All right, so we'll have a breakdown for the month. Goes day by day. Bandwidth is the amount of data that's moved over the connection. It's not really an issue these days, but it used to be with hosting, you'd get a monthly data bandwidth limit like you do on your phone. And then if you exceed that, your economy hosting plan all of a sudden costs you like 5 times as much or twice as much. So the considerations to make. What days of the week do we get most of our traffic? Now keeping in mind that Pages is the blue one, I mean, it seems pretty consistent. Hours of the day. This is surprisingly consistent, but you can see the shorter bars. Okay, 10 in the morning is really high, and then around dinner time's pretty high, right before bedtime's pretty high. And these are patterns that are pretty predictable on websites, because really most people aren't looking at web pages in the middle of the night. Most people that are in corporate environments typically have some internet access, so there's traffic happening there. But most surfing for people happens at night. Now mobile kind of changes that a little bit, but in terms of certain types of websites that people go to, it's still going to be the pattern that you're going to see. All right, this is where it starts to get interesting. So here we have hosts, top 10. These are hosts that are coming in to the site. Now, does anybody recognize this IP address here? It could be. No, chances are you don't. Do you guys know how to do a lookup? You guys know how to look up internet addresses and figure out where they come from? So you can do that. In some cases, you'll pull that information back. You can see all the different robots and spiders that visit the site. So, yeah, Google's hitting it. Why do they have the best search results? Because they're on it. For what? What did you search? Yeah, what did you search? Yeah, it'll probably come up first because nobody else would call it that. You want to know what the origin of that is? Right? My daughter's name is Zoe. In Greek, Zoe means life. So I just thought, web life, okay, that sounds interesting. So, whatever. Yandex, that's Yahoo. And it's also the service that sells search to Bing and all these other companies. There are other robots out there. You can see not very busy. Here's where it gets interesting. Right? 0 to 30 seconds, almost 80% of the traffic. A couple of minutes, all right, an hour plus. And when I was doing business stuff, and I would look at, okay, hour plus, all right, I got 100 people. If they each spend $20, it's $2,000. The profit on that is about this much. All right, so that covers my expenses. So you see? Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all right, you can see the pages that are hit. Top 10 pages. Oh, isn't that interesting? This is the root. That's where most people go. But there's been 8 users just looking for the font. Because it probably did some font and, whatever. The browsers, operating systems. This is fascinating. Unknown, 96%. Well, there's Windows and Mac and Linux are listed here. What other operating systems are there? This one's not. Yeah, mobile. iOS Android, for whatever reason, this piece of software loaded on here is not differentiating that. There are other tracking software that would, but we're talking 97% of my traffic is coming off of mobile devices. Yeah, well, you could probably figure it out, Carol, if you want. Browsers, unknown, that's got to be Chrome and its variants, right? Mozilla is Firefox, Safari, you guys know what that is. Internet Explorer, Opera, Lynx. Unknown could also be Edge, actually. Nokia browser. Somebody looked it up on the flip phone. They did. All right. So how are people getting to the site? Typing the address in directly or having a bookmark? Links from a news group? Links from a search engine? From external pages? That can be really big. That's right. So this is kind of interesting. Uptime. Oh, we got somebody coming in from Russia. That's kind of scary. They're trying to hack the election, I think. Yeah, some of these, actually are kind of interesting because if you look at like the full list of this, and this is something I used to do with my business site all the time. What sites are referring traffic to me? That's how I discovered Pinterest, believe it or not. I'm like, top 2 or 3, a couple different links from Pinterest. I'm like, what the heck is Pinterest? And I discovered, oh, it's a social media thing where people find really cool stuff or images or, they buying experiences and they share it with others. And I'm like, and it's bringing me 100 hits a month. I'm like, this Pinterest is something to reckon with, So that's the kind of thing you look at there. All right. And this isn't really a good example of this kind of information, but it is providing metrics that you can use. What most people are using these days is they usually attach Google Analytics to their site. We're going to talk about that too. So your host will automatically provide usually this same exact tool, just a piece of software that runs on the host, and you click on it and it brings it up. But Google Analytics has a much richer feature set. And what that involves is that you have to actually drop JavaScript code onto each and every page on your site. And then you have to have an account that reads the analytics. And then every time a page is visited, that JavaScript runs, sends information back to Google, and it logs, and it creates these beautiful looking reports, tells you where the traffic is coming from, all the same stuff we looked at, but with much more granular detail. No, it is free. There are paid services too, but the Google's is free. And if you don't have it on a site, you need to. One thing that you could do if you're interested is take the sites that you're working on right now and either find this tool on the host. You're going to need to have access to the host, obviously. Or go ahead and install Google Analytics on the site and take a measure of what kind of traffic you're getting right now. With the Russ Land Care site that Cohort 1 did, the guy was getting like a hit or 2 on his page a day. After we did it, granted it took a few months, same with the Wheel Small Engine Repair, it went from a couple hits to like hundreds of hits a week. Now, even if only 1 or 2 people are getting your service, it pays, right? So I think like Jake's dad's business, right? If you get a couple hundred people a week visiting the page, and you turn one of them into a customer that comes in for a $300 break job, in a way that almost pays for at least the hosting for the month. And that's the way you need to think about it. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Try to finish this up before lunch. We talked about that. All right, different ways to do your work. So, what you're seeing here is not exactly the system development lifecycle, but it falls into that approach. You guys have probably learned about the waterfall approach, I'm hoping. Heard about it a little bit. So this is not new. So you need to figure out what you're going to do. I mean, this is kind of the standard SDLC thing. You got to define what you're going to do, put together how you think you're going to do it, then you actually do it, and then you put it out into the world. And that approach really is probably the most common in terms of both being formally defined and the way that people work. And the reason people work that way is because that's the way, you know, it happens to go. And if you're working on a project when you're doing the SDLC, you're going to see some of these circular things that are coming up. But basically, by the time you've deployed, then you're at the point where it's like, okay, well, it's out there. Chances are there's going to be problems. You know, by the time your project is done, how long is your website going to be out there before it looks like antiquated, or you need to add features to it, and you start doing the whole process over again. All right, so there's a different approach, and we're going to have a little assignment on agile development later on in the course. I don't know if any of you looked at that yet, but the agile approach is a little bit different. It really takes all those same steps, but it puts them together on a micro level. So for example, you might, instead of like dealing with your project in this big holistic waterfall like this, you're going to take it and like, all right, let's build this out and see how this approach works. Great. All right, well, let's revise all this and try a different approach. Or portions of the project each have their own waterfall built in. And really what Agile is all about is kind of the way we work naturally in the modern world, in a connected world, in a highly communicative world, you know, where things don't need to necessarily be put on paper. It's like, well, we tried this template and it didn't work. So we could redraft the proposal with the client, or we could just do something else. And and then you're putting in a new template. Well, that's got all the, you know, plan, design, develop components in it as well. And then you have team members. They each might be in their own little loop on that same thing. So it might be like a microcosm unto itself is really a nice way to look at it.
That plan seems to be the most popular.
It's the most modern method, and it's a defined method. And one of the things you'll see later on, if you want to jump ahead a few unit folders, is that there's actually a manifesto for the Agile development approach. And it's an interesting manifesto if you read it, because it doesn't tell you anything. The SDLC is very formal. First, you must understand the problem. Then you have to have a problem definition. Then you need a feasibility statement. You know, there's all these formal steps. The Agile Manifesto is like, well, if it's good for the client, that's what we should do. That's the mindset there. You know? Well, if this approach doesn't work and we're trying to force it, let's do something else. And it is the modern intuitive approach. There's also the Bellini UX approach. You can see the little circular thing, but once again, you're really kind of following that SDLC approach. It's circular. There's kind of like steps to it, like identify what the issues are. You figure out a way to do it. Then you do it. You measure it. Evaluate it. What did you learn from that whole process? And you do it all over again. The modified approach, kind of a hybrid. This is, I think, what happens a lot too, is really we're kind of working off the SDLC, but there's agile components thrown into it. The agile components might happen quite a bit when you get close to deployment, because that's when the most changes happen. But, you know, like they have a little circle here on design steps, and, you know, if you think about how design is, like Dallas was working on a logo, for example, right? and he might design a logo, and you go, well, I kind of like this, but I don't like that, so he's back to the drawing board and does something else. Oh, I kind of like this, I don't like that, oh, let's do it again. You know, so that's kind of intrinsic to like a particular step in the project. So say that again.
The scale of it, if you're talking a huge project.
Yes.
It's going to be different versus the smaller projects like Measureable, as long as it's
Yes, and you know, one of the things about agile development is also kind of making the assumption that you're working with people that have project components typically that are split up. So, because it really kind of focuses on a sort of a, you know, collective team kind of approach. Just look at that slide for a while. Have you been told, probably by me, and if you aren't in this mindset, when you work in the IT field, the whole field is about problem solving. That's what you do. Whether it's software, hardware, project management, dealing with the client, whatever it is, it's all about problem solving. If you're not comfortable with that, this is the wrong field for you. Yeah. But before you can...
But we need to know about marketing, like how to market.
I think that's an important aspect of it. And out of all the courses in your program that you guys are in, this is the course that teaches that the most. And it's not really a huge component of it, but you know, you're doing user experience design. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. You're not selling elevator buttons, but you might be selling beer or beer cans. So, all right, you can't fix something until you know what the problem is, right? Can't fix the tube on the power steering pump if you don't know that that's what's broken, right? Once you know it's broken, I mean, because you can haphazardly go about trying to create a solution that has nothing to do with the problem. So, very, very critical. Silly little slide. When you end up doing requirement statements, this is, you know, kind of falls into the proposal part of things. You have to make sure that if you're the client, that if you have a very specific set of needs, that's got to be expressed. It's absolutely necessary that I can have people log in and change content. And a lot of the clients will say that to you, right? So that's one of the reasons why we go to a system like WordPress or Joomla or Drupal or one of those, because they have login systems, right? If you were to create one on your own, you can do it. It's not really that hard. I mean, you guys have finished like your PHP class, right? You've learned how to interface with the database. There's not really that many more steps to building your own content management system, frankly. When we do advanced PHP, we work with components like that. We have projects where we do build a CMS with logins, content creation, deletion, editing. It's all in the conception, basically. But you have to spell those things out. I think, you know, the slide kind of speaks for itself. And you can see I'm editing my slides as we go. Understand the current state of the site or its competitors. Right? If you're Pepsi, you got to know what Coke's doing. Right? Gather needs and ideas from business stakeholders as well as current and potential users. Okay, that's an interesting distinction, right? Because the business will come in and they'll say, this is what we need. An example, right now I have my online project management group. This is traditional students. They're building a website for the Shalom Center in Kenosha. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's basically, yeah, okay. So I showed that to you yesterday, okay. The day before yesterday. But they have a very particular vision for their site. Their site's not bad. It has information. It provides all the stuff they want. However, they're thinking that their website is both doesn't look good and doesn't really focus on what they should focus on. So for example, what they would like to do is take more of an approach like Goodwill does, where it's more about like the marketing of the concept, right? Getting people to donate things and volunteer, right? But then also, they got to think like who's actually coming to the website. What they determined, and they kind of did it in really a non-formal fashion, is that most of the people that come to their site and involved with the organization tend to be older, tend to be retired, and tend to have money. So, I mean, who else is going to be donating, right? Not some 20-year-old trying to pay his rent, okay? But their mindset is that they need to get younger people involved because they don't necessarily have to give money. They could volunteer their time, or they could come in and serve some soup or whatever they do at the place, right? So different mindset. But that last part, current and potential users. So other people that might go to their website, well, gee, I'm homeless and I need a place to stay for the night. I don't have anything in the world, but I do have my phone, right? So where's this place? What's their phone number? What's the address? Where is it on Google Maps? You know, so what they really want to do, and that's one thing that the guy said, is like we would talk to people that come in, and they said they would go to our website and they have no idea where we're located, and their battery's dying, and it's cold outside, and they're hungry, and they don't have a car, they don't have any bus money, you know, like these are the situations, right? So if they can figure out, I can pull it up on my phone, where is this place? All right, I mean, that just to make their life easier, right? So there's kind of this like weird need, but they are looking at what those people would use the website for. So they really kind of have two audiences, the audience of like getting somebody to give money and donate resources, and then they have the need of the people that they're actually serving to be able to get information so they can get the help they need. Right. Right. Exactly. So, all right, so you got to take all those things and you build them into requirements, you know, and it's different because the client has a certain mindset, the audience has a mindset, and then you as a developer have a different mindset. You have to find a way to make it all work together. But ultimately, you got to look at what the organization or business is trying to do. They're trying to sell something, they're trying to help somebody, they're trying to inform you, you know, whatever it is, you got to kind of focus on that. All right, let me get rid of these other boxes here. There's a chance to edit my PowerPoints. Let's see. That's just a graphic saying what essentially we were talking about. And really what this is representing is the fact that you're kind of moving from this like wild, you know, hypothetical to like all these wishes and whatever to very detailed lists of exactly what we're going to do. That task tracking spreadsheet, the role definition document, the proposal are all in an attempt to get you to move from that left side over to the right side to where it's like install the template, edit the images, put in some content, test the site, deliver, and it's all bullet points and you can accomplish all those. Right. Right. Or they're not properly stated, or really have nothing to do with the project. All right, you're building this website for, you know, children, and our audience is adults. You know, so those are all considerations. All right, folks, that ends the lecture. We're going to break.